She lived between cold walls and fake smiles, where everything on the surface seemed perfect. But it only took one careful look to see that something there was more rotten than the silence in the house. Secrets began to reveal themselves behind closed doors and rehearsed laughter. Now the truth no one wanted to hear threatens to destroy everything, including the one who dared to uncover it. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us what city you're watching from. And now back to our story. The morning crept slowly over New York City, bringing with it the characteristic noise of a city that never truly sleeps. On the Upper East Side, between tall trees and well-kept brownstone walls, stood a mansion that looked like it was pulled from the pages of an architectural magazine. Everything about it breathed order, elegance, and success. The large windows reflected the golden light of dawn, the gardens displayed perfectly arranged flowers, and the electronic gate operated with the precision of a recent installation. Inside that house, Martha woke up before everyone else, as she had her entire life. At 73, she carried on her shoulders the lightness of someone who had lived a full life, but also the weight of someone who was being left behind without even realizing when it all began. Her steps were slow, measured, careful. Not from physical fragility, but from the caution of someone who had learned not to make noise, not to bother, not to take up too much space. She descended the wide staircase, holding tightly to the fine wood banister, feeling the cold of the imported marble under her bare feet. Everything in that house was imported, expensive, impeccable. Everything except affection, that, if it existed, had been imported from a distant time, from when her son Robert still looked her in the eyes and asked how her day had been. Robert, her only son. The boy she raised alone after her husband left too soon, taking with him the plans they had made together. She worked, saved, sacrificed, and dreamed for both of them. She watched Robert grow, study, and succeed, and now he was a respected real estate developer, owner of a firm that was putting up skyscrapers all over the city, a man who appeared in business magazines, who gave lectures on leadership, who was invited to important dinners. But this successful man no longer had time to sit next to his mother and just talk. The meetings were urgent, the contracts couldn't wait, the commitments piled up. And Martha understood, or at least she tried to. After all, this was what she had worked so hard for, wasn't it? So he could get to where he was. In the spacious kitchen, she made her coffee just the way she liked it. Simple, no frills. She sat at the table, far too large for one person, and looked out the window. Outside, the small side garden that she tended herself was her only real territory in that house. There, among the rose bushes and jasmine, she still felt useful, still felt like she was nurturing something alive. The sound of high heels on the marble floor announced Danielle's arrival, her daughter-in-law. Martha felt her whole body tense up slightly, an involuntary reflex she tried to control but couldn't always manage. Danielle entered the kitchen as if stepping onto a stage, always impeccable, always composed. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out, her designer outfit matched her expensive handbag, and her practiced smile was ready to be deployed when necessary. "Good morning, Martha," Danielle said in that sweet voice that sounded fake to the old woman's ears. "Sleep well?" "I did, thank you," Martha replied, without looking up from her cup. Danielle poured herself a green juice prepared by her personal nutritionist, checked something on her phone, and continued, "Robert left early. A meeting with investors. He probably won't be back until late tonight." He was always back late at night, or he didn't come back at all when business trips stretched on for days, and Martha was left there sharing that immense space with a woman who treated her with an icy cordiality, who never called her mum, who never showed any genuine interest in her life. Danielle was a perfect construction. Married to Robert for 5 years, she had become a well-known figure in the city's social circles. She attended charity events, chaired a foundation that bore her name, and gave interviews about empathy and social responsibility. To an outsider, she was the epitome of kindness and elegance. To Martha, who watched her up close every day, she was a puzzle of contradictions. How could someone who talked so much about helping others be so cold to the mother-in-law living under the same roof? How could someone who promoted awareness campaigns ignore the loneliness of an elderly woman just a few feet away? These questions circled in Martha's mind, but she never asked them out loud. She had learned over the years that some battles aren't worth fighting. After Danielle left, the house plunged into that heavy silence Martha knew so well. It was then that she heard light footsteps coming from the service area. It was Grace, the housekeeper who had worked there for almost 15 years, since before Robert got married. Grace was different. A simple woman from a humble background, she possessed something Danielle lacked: genuine humanity. Her eyes expressed true concern when she asked how Martha was doing. Her calloused hands held the old woman's with affection when she sensed she needed comfort. "Good morning, Martha," Grace said with a sincere smile. "Have you had your coffee? I made that bread you like." Grace always did things like that, small gestures of care that warmed Martha's heart. And the old woman knew instinctively that this woman saw things others didn't. Grace paid attention. She noticed when Danielle shut her office door too quickly upon hearing footsteps. She saw when phone calls were abruptly cut short. She observed the exchanged glances, the loaded silences, the tensions that grew like weeds in an abandoned garden. As the weeks went by, Martha began to notice subtle changes in the house's routine. Danielle had strange visitors when Robert wasn't home, men in suits who would stay for hours, locked in the office with her, envelopes that would arrive and disappear, documents that were hastily put away when someone approached. Curiosity wasn't a flaw of Martha's, but the intuition every mother carries, that sixth sense that warns when something isn't right, and something was definitely not right. She started paying closer attention, walking more quietly through the hallways, observing without being seen. It was on a rainy afternoon that she stumbled upon some papers left on the living room table. They were financial reports from the foundation Danielle chaired. Martha didn't know much about numbers, but she understood enough to see that the figures didn't add up. Donations that came in and vanished, announced projects that never got off the ground, beneficiaries who didn't exist. Martha's heart raced. She took pictures of some of the documents with the smartphone Robert had given her, a device she barely knew how to use but which, in that moment, became her ally. She saved the photos in a folder she carefully named, hiding it among hundreds of other pictures of flowers and birds she used to take in the garden. But there was something more, something she still didn't want to believe, but that the signs pointed to with cruel clarity. The comings and goings of one man in particular, always on the days Robert was traveling. The laughter coming from upstairs, from the master bedroom, the knowing looks. The intimacy that shouldn't exist. Martha's stomach turned. She wanted to be wrong, wanted her imagination to be creating ghosts where there were none. But a mother is not easily fooled, and she knew, in the depths of her soul, that her son was being cheated on inside his own home, by the woman who swore to love him, the woman who used his last name and his reputation to build a facade of perfection. One night, when Robert finally came home, she tried to talk to him. She waited for him to finish dinner, waited for him to settle into the armchair in the living room, and then, with her heart in her throat, she began, "Robert, honey, I need to talk to you about Danielle." He looked up from his tablet, already wearing that tired expression he'd been using lately. "About what, Mom?" I've been seeing strange things. Documents that don't make sense. People who come here when you're not around." Robert sighed, a sigh Martha knew well, the sigh of someone who has no patience to listen. "Mom, Danielle runs a foundation. It's normal for her to have people over, to have meetings." "But honey, Mom, please," he interrupted her, his voice harsher now. "I trust my wife. She does incredible work, helps so many people. I'm not going to listen to baseless accusations." The words cut like blades. Martha felt her eyes sting, but she swallowed her tears. Robert had already stood up, was already climbing the stairs, had already closed the door to her world. She was left there, alone in the large, cold living room, feeling the weight of rejection. She had tried to warn him, tried to protect him, and she was ignored. Like so many other times in her life, her voice didn't carry enough weight to be heard. That night Martha barely slept. She tossed and turned, thinking about everything she had seen, everything she suspected. and for the first time in a long time, she felt afraid. Not of Danielle herself, but of what Danielle was capable of doing to keep her masks in place. The next day, Danielle treated her with an exaggerated kindness. She offered her coffee, asked if she needed anything, even suggested they go to the salon together. Martha noticed the change, the tension disguised as solicitude. Danielle knew. She knew she'd been found. Out knew her mother-in-law had tried to talk to Robert, knew she had to act. And Martha, looking into Danielle's clear, empty eyes, felt a chill run down her spine. This woman wasn't just going to let things be. This woman was going to do something. The question was what? The following days were marked by an artificial tranquility. Danielle continued with her projects, her meetings, her public appearances. Robert remained immersed in his work, and Martha kept watching, mentally noting every detail, every inconsistency, every sign that something very wrong was about to happen. The household routine continued like a well-rehearsed play. Every morning the same scenes repeated with mechanical precision. Danielle would come down for coffee already dressed for the day, with that air of someone who has life under control. She would check her schedule on her phone, make a few calls to her foundation's team, and organize events and campaigns. From the outside, she seemed like a dedicated woman, busy with noble causes. But Martha already knew what went on behind the scenes of that performance. One afternoon, while pretending to read a magazine in the living room, Martha overheard fragments of one of Danielle's phone conversations. Her daughter-in-law was in the office, but the door had been left ajar. "Don't worry, everything is under control," Danielle said in that sweet, controlled voice. "The documents, they're stored in a safe place. No one will get access. And as for that other matter, I've already arranged a solution." Martha's blood ran cold. What solution? What matter? The words echoed in her mind, heavy with dark meanings. She knew she was in danger, but she couldn't yet imagine the extent of Danielle's coldness. That night, Robert was finally home for dinner. The three of them sat at the table, but the conversation was sparse, punctuated only by superficial comments about the weather, the news, about nothing that really mattered. Martha watched her son, this man she had known since his first cry, his first step, and she couldn't understand how he had become so distant, so blind to what was happening around him. "Robert, are you traveling again next week?" Danielle asked, buttering her bread with delicate movements. "I am. I have that bidding process in D.C. It should take about 5 days." 5 days, Martha saw the quick glint in Danielle's eyes. 5 days without Robert at home. 5 days where anything could happen. Grace, ever observant, noticed the shift in the house's atmosphere. She had known Martha long enough to tell when something was troubling her. One morning, while helping Martha water the plants in the garden, she whispered, "Are you okay? You seem worried." Martha looked at the woman who was more than a housekeeper, who was a friend, a confidant, a silent witness to everything that happened within those walls. "Grace, if anything happens to me, will you take care of my garden?" The question sounded strange, heavy with foreboding. Grace put down the watering can and held Martha's hands tightly. "Nothing is going to happen, Martha. I'm here. I'm paying attention." But they both knew that paying attention isn't always enough to stop bad things from happening. Sometimes it only serves to witness their arrival. "Are you enjoying this story? Tell me your opinion and how you think it will end." The following week brought with it a tension that seemed to fill every corner of the house. Robert left early on Monday, carrying his executive briefcase and promises that he'd be back soon. He kissed Danielle at the door, gave a distracted wave to his mother, who watched from the window, and got into the car that would take him to the airport. Martha watched the gate close and felt a tightness in her chest, as if an invisible door had also closed between her and any possibility of protection. Danielle changed the instant Robert's car disappeared around the corner. The mask of the devoted wife slipped a little, revealing an expression Martha had never seen so clearly. Calculated coldness, dangerous determination. Her daughter-in-law came back inside without a glance, already typing on her phone, already making calls, already setting in motion. Gears that Martha couldn't yet fully comprehend. For the first 2 days the routine was almost normal. Danielle left early for foundation meetings, came back in the afternoon, and locked herself in the office. Grace did her work with extra attention, watching without seeming to watch, present without being intrusive. And Martha remained in her safe territory, the garden, where the plants didn't lie, didn't scheme, just grew or withered according to the care they received. It was on Wednesday that things began to change more concretely. Martha was in the living room when the doorbell rang. Grace answered, and soon a man she had never seen before appeared. He was tall and thin, with restless eyes that darted around, analyzing everything. He wore a cheap suit and had hands that trembled slightly when Danielle greeted him at the door. The two went up to the office and closed the door. Martha, driven by an intuition that was now screaming alarms in her head, approached silently. She couldn't hear the words, but she caught the tone. Danielle, firm and commanding. The man, hesitant and questioning. At one point his voice rose. "But this is too risky, Danielle. If something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," her voice cut like a blade. "You just need to do exactly what I say, and you'll be well compensated, don't worry." Martha moved away quickly when she heard footsteps approaching the door. She pretended to be just passing through the hallway, but her heart was pounding. She knew now with absolute certainty that Danielle was planning something, and that this something involved other people, involved risks, involved secrets that had to be kept at any cost. The man left the house half an hour later with a thick envelope under his arm. Danielle walked, him to the door with that smile that didn't reach her eyes, the smile Martha had learned to fear. That night Grace stayed late, finishing chores she would normally leave for the next day. When they were finally alone in the kitchen, she approached Martha. "Did you see the man who came here today?" she asked in a low voice. "I did. I'd never seen him before. Me neither. And I didn't like the look of him." Grace wiped her hands on her apron, nervous. "Martha, I have a bad feeling, a really bad feeling." "Me too, Grace, me too." The two women looked at each other, sharing a fear that didn't have a name yet but already had shape and weight. Grace squeezed Martha's hand tightly. "If you need me, call me. Any time. I live close by. I can get here fast." Martha thanked her with teary eyes. Having someone who truly cared was more than she'd had in a long time. On Thursday, Danielle announced at breakfast, with a lightness too studied to be natural, "Martha, I was thinking we could go out today. Get some fresh air. You spend so much time in the house." The suggestion caught Martha off guard. Danielle had never, in 5 years of living together, suggested they do something together. She had never shown any interest in spending time with her, in getting to know her, in building any kind of bond beyond the bare minimum required to keep up appearances. "I don't know, Danielle. I'm a little tired today." "Oh, it'll do you good. Just a short trip. There's a place I want to show you. I think you'll like it." There was something in Danielle's voice, a subtle insistence, a pressure disguised as kindness. Martha felt the alarm bells ring louder in her head, but at the same time a part of her wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, Danielle was truly trying to connect. "All right," she finally agreed, against every instinct that screamed at her to refuse. Danielle smiled, and this time the smile reached her eyes. But it was a strange glint, a satisfaction that made Martha immediately regret her decision. "Perfect. We'll leave after lunch." Grace, who had overheard the conversation from the kitchen, appeared with a worried expression. "You're going out with Mrs. Danielle?" "I am. She wants to show me a place." Grace said nothing, but her eyes said it all. "Be careful. Be very careful." The hours until lunch passed slowly. Martha tried to keep busy in the garden, but her hands trembled as she held the watering can. She tried to read, but the words danced on the page without making sense. She tried to pray and discovered there was so much fear inside her that the prayers came out jumbled, without order, without clarity. Danielle, meanwhile, was on the phone almost constantly, short, objective conversations in a low tone, confirming something, organizing something, preparing something. When it was finally time to leave, Danielle came downstairs dressed more casually but still impeccably. Designer jeans, a silk blouse, expensive sunglasses. Martha put on her most comfortable clothes and came down, clutching the purse where she kept her cell phone. The car was already waiting in the garage. It wasn't Danielle's car, that red convertible she loved to show off. It was a dark sedan with tinted windows that Martha didn't remember seeing before. It's a rental, Danielle explained, as if she had read the question on her mother-in-law's face. My car's in the shop. They got in the car. Danielle drove calmly, following the familiar streets of the neighborhood. But after a few minutes, she started taking turns that Martha didn't recognize. They left the Upper East Side, drove through congested avenues, and entered increasingly unfamiliar neighborhoods. Where are we going? Martha asked, trying to keep her voice steady. It's a surprise, Danielle replied, without taking her eyes off the road. The landscape was changing. The tall buildings gave way to lower, older constructions. The wide streets turned into narrow alleys. The noise of the big city remained, but now it was different, harsher, less polished. Martha felt her heart speed up. She discreetly took out her phone, thinking of calling Grace, but realized she had no signal. Or had Danielle disabled something in the car? Technology was a foreign territory to her, and at that moment her ignorance made her feel even more vulnerable. This is getting pretty far, don't you think? She tried again, her voice weaker now. We're almost there. 15 more minutes on the road, getting farther and farther from the city center, closer and closer to areas Martha only knew from the news. Forgotten places, places where the city ended and neglect began. Finally, Danielle stopped the car in front of a rusty gate. Behind it was an empty lot covered in rubble, unfinished structures and accumulated trash. The smell was strong, a mix of decay and dust. We're here, Danielle announced, turning off the engine. Here where? Martha looked around, her fear now turning into pure panic. This is where your curiosity brought you, Martha. Danielle took off her sunglasses, and her eyes were cold, devoid of any humanity. You shouldn't have meddled in things that don't concern you. Before Martha could react, the car door opened. It was the man in the cheap suit, the one who had visited the house. He grabbed Martha's arm tightly, pulling her out. Danielle, for God's sake, what are you doing? Martha tried to break free, but her 73 years were no match for the man's strength. What I have to do to protect my life, my reputation, everything I've built. You threatened all of it with your snooping. Now you're going to stay here, nice and quiet, and think about the dangers of being inconvenient. The man dragged Martha into the lot. She stumbled on rocks, on construction debris, feeling the skin on her knees scrape as she fell. He lifted her up without any gentleness, pushing her into a roofless structure, just unplastered brick walls forming an empty square. There, he tied her hands with a rough rope that cut into her skin. He tied her feet. He left her sitting on the cold ground, surrounded by trash and wreckage. Danielle appeared at the entrance of the structure, looking down at her. When Robert gets back, I'll say you went to visit a friend and never came home. We'll search, of course. We'll be frantic. And when they finally find you, if they find you, you'll be so confused, so frail, that no one will believe your stories about me. You won't get away with this, Martha whispered, her voice broken but still defiant. The truth always comes out. Danielle laughed, a joyless sound. The truth only comes out when someone wants to hear it. And your son, Martha, he doesn't want to hear anything that might tarnish the perfect image he has of me. She turned to leave, but stopped, looking back one last time. Oh, and don't waste your energy screaming. No one ever comes here. This lot has been abandoned for years, and with that, they left. Martha heard the car engine start, heard the sound fade into the distance, until only the heavy silence of that forgotten place remained. She was alone, tied up, abandoned, in a place where no one would look for her. The tears came, hot and uncontrollable, but along with them came something stronger, determination. Martha had survived too much in her life to give up now. She had raised a son alone, faced poverty, overcome loss and disappointment. She wasn't going to be defeated by that cold, calculating woman. She began to work at the ropes, trying to loosen them. Her fingers, trembling but persistent, searched for a flaw, for a sliver of hope. The rope was thick, rough, tied tightly. Every movement hurt, but she didn't stop. Minutes turned into hours, and the daylight began to fade. The place smelled of neglect. Half-finished walls told stories of projects that started and never ended. rusted rebar pointed toward the sky, and Martha, in the middle of it all, fought against the ropes, against the fear. Meanwhile, back at the Upper East Side mansion, Grace finished her chores with a heavy heart. It was already 6 p.m., and Martha hadn't returned. Danielle had come back alone around 3, rushing inside and going straight to her room. When Grace asked about her mother-in-law, the answer came quickly, coldly. She wanted to stay out a little longer. She'll be back later. But something was wrong. Grace knew Martha too well. She wouldn't stay out late, not without calling. And there was something in Danielle's manner, a tension disguised as indifference, that set off alarms. At 7 p.m., Grace decided to act. She went up to Danielle's room and knocked on the door. "Sorry to bother you, Mrs. Danielle, but I'm worried." "About Martha. She doesn't usually stay out this late." Danielle opened the door just a crack. "I already told you, Grace. She wanted to walk around more. She probably ran into a friend. You know how elderly people are. But she didn't say anything to me, and her cell phone is off. It probably ran out of battery. When she gets back, I'll let you know." The door closed. Grace wasn't convinced. She went back to the kitchen and picked up her own phone. She called Martha's number. Voicemail. Night fell slowly, bringing with it darker shadows and colder temperatures. In the abandoned lot, Martha finally managed to loosen the ropes a little. Her hands ached, bleeding in some spots, but she felt a small bit of progress. If she could just move her fingers a certain way, maybe, just maybe, she could get free. The sounds of the city were distant, muffled. Horns, voices, life happening far away, so close and yet so far. She thought of Robert, wondering where he was at that moment, probably at some business dinner, discussing contracts, closing deals, with no idea what was happening to his mother. She also thought about how she had gotten to this point. At what moment did she stop mattering so much? When did she become just a burden, an inconvenience, something to be gotten rid of? The questions were cruel, but she faced them with the courage of someone who had nothing left to lose. The night fell completely. Stars appeared in the patch of visible sky. Martha looked at them, remembering when Robert was a child. And then she freed one of her hands. The rope gave just enough. Her fingers were numb, bruised, but free. She untied the other hand and then her feet. When she stood up, shaky but free, she felt a wave of relief. She had to get out of there. She had to find help. She had to go back and show everyone who Danielle really was. She walked toward the gate. Her legs were weak. Her whole body ached, but she kept going, one step at a time. Across the country, Robert answered a call. It was Danielle, her voice filled with concern. "Honey, your mum went out for a walk today and she's still not back. I'm starting to get worried." "What do you mean she's not back?" "This afternoon she wanted to get out for a bit, but it's late now and her phone is going straight to voicemail." Robert felt his stomach clench. "Late? It's almost 10 p.m. "I know. That's why I'm calling. I think we should start looking." "I'll catch the first flight back tomorrow morning. For now, call the hospitals, the police." Robert hung up, his hands shaking. His mother, Martha, the woman who had always been there. And now she was missing. Guilt began to gnaw at him. Grace couldn't focus on anything. Ever since Martha had left with Danielle that morning, an inexplicable anxiety had taken hold of her. She tried calling her employer's cell, but it went straight to voicemail. Strange. Martha always answered her calls, always. The afternoon wore on with no sign of them. Danielle came home around 5, alone. She walked in calmly, smiling as if she'd had a normal day. Grace met her in the living room. "Mrs. Danielle, where's Martha?" Danielle took off her shoes, unhurried. "Oh, she decided to stay at the project a little longer. She met one of the volunteers and they got to talking. I offered to pick her up later, but she said she'd rather take a cab. You know how independent she is." Grace felt that something wasn't right. Martha would never stay alone in an unfamiliar place. She would never take a cab without letting someone know. "Are you sure?" Danielle looked at the housekeeper with an expression that didn't tolerate questions. "I'm sure, Grace. Why do you ask?" "No reason. It's just that she didn't answer my call. The battery probably died. You know how she forgets to charge it. And with that, Danielle went upstairs to her room, leaving Grace alone in the living room with a knot in her chest that only grew tighter. When Robert got home from the office, it was already dark. They noted his mother's absence at dinner, but Danielle repeated the same story. Robert believed her. Why wouldn't he? He even called his mother's cell, but since it was off, he figured she really had forgotten to charge it. Danielle reinforced how excited her mother-in-law was, meeting new people, getting involved. He even smiled, thinking his mum was finally breaking out of her closed-off routine. But Grace couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She stayed up all night, watching the gate, waiting. When dawn broke and Martha hadn't appeared, she knew she had to do something. She found Robert before he left for work. "Mr. Robert, I need to speak with you." "Right now, Grace? I'm running late." "It's about Martha. She didn't come home." Robert frowned. "What do you mean she didn't come home?" "Danielle said she stayed at the project yesterday." "I know, but she's still not back, and her cell phone is still off." Something in Grace's tone made Robert pause. He picked up his phone and called Danielle, who was still asleep. "Honey, has Mom not come back yet?" On the other end, Danielle feigned surprise. "What do you mean? She said she was taking a cab home last night." "Well, she didn't. Do you have the address of that place?" There was a pause. "I do. I'll send it to you right now. But I'm worried, Robert. Do you think she got lost?" Robert felt his heart race. His elderly mother, lost somewhere in the city. He grabbed his car keys. "I'm going to look for her. Send me the address." Danielle sent an address, but it wasn't the address of the abandoned lot. It was a legitimate community center in the Bronx, where the non-profit actually had a project. When Robert got there, no one had seen Martha. No volunteer had talked to her. No one knew anything. Robert called Danielle, frantic. "No one here has seen my mother." "What do you mean? She was talking with the coordinator." "No, she wasn't. The coordinator wasn't even here yesterday." On the other end, Danielle started to cry. A perfect performance. "Oh my God, Robert. Then where is she? I left her there. I saw her go inside." Robert hung up, shaking. He called the police and filed a missing persons report. Cases involving the elderly were treated with urgency. The search began. Security cameras were checked. But the car that had taken Martha didn't appear on any footage. Because it wasn't a family car. It was a rental with fake plates, driven by a man who knew how to cover his tracks. Meanwhile, Martha was tied up in a cold warehouse, having gone nearly 24 hours without food or water. Her body ached. Her mouth was dry. But her mind was strangely clear. She knew Danielle had left her there to disappear. Maybe so everyone would think. She had run away or gotten lost or worse. But Martha wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. With great effort, she managed to loosen the ropes on her wrists a little. Her hands were swollen and bruised, but she kept going. Hours passed. The pain was unbearable. But her anger was greater, the anger of being deceived, used, and discarded. When she finally freed one of her hands, she cried with relief. She untied the other, then her feet. She stood up, staggering. Her body protested, but her will was stronger. She looked for a way out. The warehouse had high windows and locked doors, but there was a side opening covered with old planks of wood. With a strength she didn't know she still had, she began to tear the planks away. 1, 2, 3. Until daylight flooded the dark space. She stepped out, nearly falling, breathing fresh air for the first time in hours. She was in a desolate place. Vacant lots, unfinished buildings, trash everywhere. But in the distance she saw movement. A street, people. She started walking, slowly, stumbling. Every step was a victory. Back at the Upper East Side house, Grace couldn't wait any longer. She found Lucas, her grandson, and told him everything she knew. Her suspicions, the strange conversations, the missing phone, the documents. Lucas listened in silence, his face growing more serious by the second. "Grace, do you think my mom did something to Grandma? I don't want to believe it, but..." Lucas picked up his phone and called his father. "Dad, you need to come home. Now." When Robert arrived, he found Lucas and Grace in the living room. Danielle was in her room, claiming to be in shock over her mother-in-law's disappearance. Lucas explained everything. Robert listened, incredulous at first, then with growing anger. "Are you accusing your mother of doing something to Grandma?" "I'm saying strange things are happening here, Dad. And Grace saw them. We all did." Robert stormed up the stairs and burst into the bedroom. Danielle was sitting on the bed, her face in her hands. When he entered, she looked up with red eyes. "Robert, thank God you're back. I've been worried sick about your mother." "Where is she, Danielle?" "What do you mean? Where is she?" "I don't know. I dropped her off at the project." "What project? No one there saw her." "The cameras don't show our car. You lied." Danielle stood up, feigning outrage. "How dare you accuse me? I'm trying to help." Robert grabbed her phone from the nightstand. He started scrolling through it. Deleted messages, calls to unknown numbers. Danielle tried to snatch it back, but he pushed her away. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing. You're going crazy." But her voice was faltering, and Robert knew that voice. He knew that lie. Just then, the house phone rang. It was the police. They had found an elderly woman, bruised and disoriented, at an urgent care clinic in the Bronx. She said her name was Martha. Robert dropped everything and ran. When he got to the clinic, he found his mother lying on a gurney with bandages on her wrists and face. But she was alive, alive. He knelt beside her, crying, "Mum, what happened? Who did this to you?" Martha looked at her son with tired but steady eyes. "Your wife, son. Your wife did this." The words landed like a bomb. Robert was speechless. He wanted to deny it, to say it was impossible. But looking at his mother's condition, at the marks on her body, at the fear in her eyes, he knew it was true. All of it was true. The police were called. Martha gave her statement. She told them about the drive, the warehouse, the ropes, the abandonment. She described the driver, the car. And when she mentioned Danielle, the room fell silent. They sent a team to the Upper East Side house. When they arrived, Danielle was packing suitcases, trying to flee. Lucas blocked her way, holding the door. She glared at him. "Get out of my way, Lucas." "You tried to get rid of my grandmother." Danielle laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "Your grandmother is a crazy old woman who doesn't know what she's saying." But at that moment, the police officers walked in, and Danielle knew it was over. She still tried to maintain her composure, her elegance, her calm. But when the charges were formally read and the handcuffs were snapped on, the mask fell, and what was left was a furious, exposed, defeated woman. They took her away. The house felt empty, heavy. Robert went back to the clinic, sat beside his mother, and held her hand. "Forgive me, Mom, forgive me for not seeing, for not listening, for letting this happen." Martha squeezed her son's hand. "You were blind, son, but now you can see, and that's what matters." In the following days, the whole truth came out. Investigations into the non-profit's documents revealed millions of dollars in embezzled funds. Shell companies, fictitious donations, non-existent projects. Danielle had built an empire of lies, and when Martha started to uncover it, she decided to eliminate her. Literally. The accountant, under pressure from the police, confessed everything. He told them about the threats, the fear, the manipulation. Danielle had used him as a scapegoat, but he had kept proof. Emails, recordings, documents. It all came to light. The press exploded. The woman who was a symbol of charity was revealed to be a fraud. The scandal was enormous. Robert had to shut down the non-profit, return donations, and face lawsuits. But he did it all because he knew it was the right thing to do. Martha came home after a week in the hospital. Grace welcomed her with flowers from the garden and tears of joy. Lucas hugged her for a long time, and Robert never left her side. For the first time in years, he truly saw her. He truly heard her. The house began to change. The walls seemed lighter, the silence less oppressive. Martha went back to her garden, tending to her plants. But now she wasn't alone. Robert showed up every morning to have coffee with her. Lucas spent his afternoons telling her about college, and Grace, faithful as ever, was there, smiling. Danielle was tried and convicted, not for attempted murder, but for felony endangerment, fraud, and embezzlement. Years in prison, her public image destroyed, her connections severed. Everything she had built with lies came crashing down. The months that followed were about rebuilding. Not just the house, but everything that had been broken over the years. Robert understood painfully that his professional success had cost him the most precious thing, his connection with the people who truly mattered. He cut back on travel, delegated responsibilities, and started looking inward at his own home. And what he saw was a strong, resilient mother who had survived not only physical abandonment, but the emotional neglect that had been going on for years. Martha held no grudges. Surprisingly, she forgave. Not because what happened was acceptable, but because carrying hatred would be giving Danielle a victory she didn't deserve. Martha chose peace. She chose to rebuild. And in doing so, she became an example to everyone around her. The garden, which had always been her refuge, became a shared space. Robert learned to plant, to tend, to wait. Lucas spent weekends there listening to his grandmother's stories, learning about patience, about cycles, about life. Grace remained a constant presence, the silent anchor who had always been there, even when no one else noticed. Robert decided to transform what was left of the non-profit into something real. He didn't want to just shut it down and forget. He wanted to right the wrong, to honor the people who had been deceived. He hired independent auditors, returned every stolen cent, and created a transparent board. And this time, he involved his mother. Martha, who always had a keen sense of justice, became an advisor for the new project. Her experience, her pain, was transformed into wisdom. Lucas changed too. Seeing his grandmother in that state, understanding his own mother's capacity for cruelty, made him reevaluate everything. He decided to change his major. He switched from business administration to social work. He wanted to work with real people, to help those who truly needed it, not manipulate numbers on a spreadsheet. Robert was surprised at first, but then he understood, and he supported him. There were, of course, challenges. The public exposure was brutal. Reporters camped out on their doorstep, wanting statements. Neighbors looked on with a mixture of pity and curiosity. Some old friends distanced themselves, afraid of being associated with the scandal. But others, the true ones, remained, and new ones emerged. Martha received letters, hundreds of them, from women who identified with her story, who had also been neglected, ignored, discarded. She read every one, cried. With some, smiled with others, and she answered them all, personally, by hand. Each word was a gesture of solidarity, of recognition, of strength. Robert saw his mother differently now. He saw not a frail old woman who needed protection, but a resilient woman who had survived a lifetime of silences and still found the strength to start over. He wondered how he had never seen it before, how he had been so blind. One afternoon, he found her in the garden, as always. He sat down beside her. "Mom, I wanted to apologize for real." Martha looked at her. "Son, you already have, honey. I know, but I need to say it again every day if I have to, because what I did, or rather, what I didn't do, almost cost you your life." She took his hand. "You were lost, Robert. Life took you down paths that led you away from what was essential. But you came back, and that's worth more than any apology." Robert felt his eyes sting. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No one deserves forgiveness, honey. Forgiveness is a gift, and I choose to give you that gift because I love you. I always love you. I have, even when you couldn't see it." They sat there in silence, listening to the wind in the leaves, the birds, the life happening around them. And for the first time in years, Robert felt at peace. Danielle's trial was followed by crowds. She arrived at the courthouse in makeup, well-dressed, maintaining her posture to the very end. On the stand, she listened to every accusation without showing emotion. When she was sentenced to 8 years in prison, she simply nodded. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she showed no remorse, and perhaps, thought Martha, who watched from afar, that was the greatest tragedy of all. Not the prison sentence, but the inability to feel. When they left the courthouse, the press surrounded Robert. He gave a brief, firm statement. "My mother survived something no one should ever have to go through. She was abandoned, humiliated, and treated as disposable. But she is the strongest person I know, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring that strength. Justice was served today. But true justice is about rebuilding. It's about the love we choose to cultivate. It's the attention we give to those beside us. No one will ever be invisible in my home again. No one will ever be ignored. His words became headlines, and they touched thousands of people. In the following months, life found a new rhythm. Martha started giving talks, small ones, at community centers, schools, support groups. She spoke about resilience, about not giving up, about how no life is insignificant. Her voice, once silenced, now echoed, and it inspired. Robert got involved in public policies for the elderly. He realized his mother's story wasn't unique. Thousands of older people were neglected, abandoned, made invisible. He used his influence, his resources, to change that. He created support programs, community centers, and reporting hotlines. He turned pain into action. Lucas graduated and went to work for a real non-profit, one that cared for the homeless. Many of them were elderly, and every time he saw a wrinkled face, he remembered his grandmother, and he worked harder. He made a difference, one person at a time. Grace stayed on at the house, but now she wasn't just an employee. She was family. She sat at the table for meals. She weighed in on decisions. She was heard, valued, and when Robert offered her a significant raise, she accepted, but asked for something more. That part of the money be used for scholarships for her nieces and nephews, and it was. The atmosphere in the Upper East Side house changed. The walls that once felt cold now held laughter. The garden expanded. Martha taught neighbors how to plant. Kids from the area came to learn. That space of solitude became a meeting point, a place of life, of community. One afternoon, Lucas took his grandmother to visit the warehouse where she had been left. She wanted to go. She needed to close that chapter. When they arrived, the place was still abandoned, but now it seemed smaller, less frightening. Martha walked inside, touched the walls, felt the ground beneath her feet. And then she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I survived. I won. Lucas held her hand. You always win, Grandma. They left that place and never went back, but the memory, the strength of that moment remained. Robert sold some of the luxury cars. He donated part of the money to causes supporting the elderly and children. He simplified his life. He realized that status was nothing compared to a real hug, a real conversation, a genuine presence. Martha turned 75. The party was simple, at home, with people who truly mattered. There were no photographers, no formalities. There was affection. When they asked her to make a speech, she stood up, looked at everyone gathered there and said, I spent years feeling invisible. I spent years believing my worth had run out. But I learned that there is no such thing as a disposable life. Every one of us matters. Every pain has weight. And every new beginning is possible. I almost gave up, but I didn't. And today, I'm here. Surrounded by true love. That is the greatest gift, not the party, not the birthday wishes, but knowing that I am seen, that I am heard, that I am loved. Everyone applauded, and many cried. Robert understood that his mother's story wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt small, ignored, disposable. It belonged to everyone who had been underestimated and still found strength. It belonged to everyone who chose to forgive, to rebuild, to move forward. He started giving talks alongside his mother, father and son, sharing their experiences, their mistakes, their lessons. Together, they touched hearts, changed perspectives, and inspired change. Danielle's legacy, which should have been one of charity, became one of fraud. But Martha's legacy, which could have been one of bitterness, became one of overcoming. And that is the legacy that remained. That was told. That transformed. Lucas met a young woman at one of the non-profits where he worked. She also had a difficult story of abandonment and struggle. They connected. They fell in love. And when he brought her to meet the family, Martha hugged her with the same love she had once offered Danielle. But this time the love was returned. And that made all the difference. Life went on, with its ups and downs, like any life, but with one fundamental difference: attention. Everyone in the house learned to pay attention, to the look in another's eyes, to the silence that speaks, to the presence that matters. No one was invisible anymore, no one was forgotten. Grace retired years later, but continued to visit the house every day, because that was her place, her family, and Martha always welcomed her with a smile, a hug, and gratitude, because she knew that without Grace the story might have been different. Robert never remarried. He dedicated himself to his transformative work and his family. He learned that love isn't control or possession or a facade. It's presence, it's listening, it's a daily choice. And Martha? She kept planting, she kept living, she kept being an example. Until the end of her days, she was proof that new beginnings are possible, that forgiveness is freeing, and that strength lies not in the body, but in the soul. When she passed away years later, peacefully, surrounded by those she loved, she left behind a flourishing garden, a united family, and a lesson that would never be forgotten. No one is disposable, no pain is too small, and love, when it's real, always finds its way back. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Martha and her family has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming, abandonment, and rebuilding, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this narrative resonated with you the most. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, the wounds we carry, and the strength that makes us move forward. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on life, love, and the bonds that unite us.